You have tried this before. Eyes closed, jaw tight, repeating a sentence you were told would change your life. And somewhere in your chest, a quiet, exhausting sense that you were pushing against something. Pushing a door that was already open, and still bracing your whole body against the frame. You called it manifestation. What if the pushing was never the part that worked? There's a strange answer waiting for you, and it doesn't come from a guru. It comes from physics. The universe you are trying so hard to build already holds every version of itself, waiting unclaimed. Not as fantasy, as measured fact, confirmed in laboratories for a century, repeated under every condition scientists could design. The paradox isn't whether reality bends. It's why the easiest thing in physics has become the hardest thing you have ever tried to do. Start with what you actually did that night with your eyes closed. You were not creating something from nothing. You were trying to force a specific outcome into being, gripping it, defending it against doubt, checking every few minutes whether it had worked. That gripping, be honest, felt less like creation and more like combat. Think about how specific that combat gets. Maybe it was a number in a bank account you kept refreshing on your phone, as if watching it hard enough could move the decimal. Maybe it was a text message you composed and deleted 11 times, each version calibrated to produce a particular reply. In both cases, you weren't building anything. You were negotiating with a future you didn't trust, trying to out-argue your own doubt through sheer repetition. That's not creation. That's a hostage negotiation with your own nervous system, and you were on both sides of the table. Here is the uncomfortable redirection. Physics never described reality as a locked, finished thing waiting for you to conquer it. At the most fundamental level, before anything is measured, physical systems exist as a spread of possibilities. Not one fixed outcome hiding behind a curtain, but many potential outcomes coexisting, each with its own weight, its own probability. Nothing there resembles a fortress you have to storm. There is no wall to break down. There was never a wall. So if the many possibilities are already sitting there patiently, what is actually preventing your desired one from becoming real? That question is going to take the rest of this video to answer honestly, because the tempting shortcut, you just have to believe hard enough, is not what the physics says, and pretending otherwise is exactly why so many people try manifestation once, feel foolish when the bank account doesn't change overnight, and quit before they ever learn what the process actually required of them. Not belief, access. What blocks the outcome is not your belief. What blocks it is a specific, describable mechanism, something you do automatically every single day that keeps collapsing reality into the same familiar shape over and over. You don't yet know what that mechanism is, but you have felt its effects your whole life. The sense that no matter how much you visualize, the world snaps back to what it already was, like a rubber band released the instant you stop paying attention. That snapping back has a name, and it is not mystical. It is mechanical. And the first place you can actually see it, not believe it, see it in an experiment repeated thousands of times across a century of physics, is the strangest sentence in modern science. Reality behaves differently when something is watching. Not a hope, a measurement. That single fact is either the most overused, watered-down cliché in the self-help industry, repeated in 1,000 videos without ever being properly explained, or the most underexplained real phenomenon in modern science, depending entirely on how carefully the next few minutes handle it. This video is not going to pick the comfortable version. It's going to show you exactly what the experiment proves, exactly what it does not prove, and then walk you into the far more interesting question. What does it mean when the observer collapsing your reality is a nervous system that has spent a lifetime learning to expect disappointment before it dares expect anything else? What would it change about your evening ritual if you knew tonight that the watching itself was the problem? Sit with how disorienting that actually is once it lands. Everything you were taught about achievement, track your progress, monitor your metrics, stay vigilant about your goals, is, in this one specific domain, exactly backward. Vigilance is the mechanism that keeps reselecting the outcome you already have. That's not a minor correction to the manifestation idea. It's a full inversion of it, and it means almost every technique sold under that name, The tracking apps, the daily check-ins, the anxious rereading of your own vision board may be quietly working against the very thing they promised to deliver. This isn't a small claim, and it deserves more than a slogan before this video earns the right to make it. Consider how differently your last year might have gone if, instead of tracking every sign of progress toward a goal, you had simply built the conditions for it and then genuinely looked away. Not given up, looked away. There's a difference between abandoning something and refusing to interrogate it every 12 hours for proof it's still alive. Most people have never practiced the second one. Most people don't even know it's a separate skill from effort. So the next stop isn't another affirmation. It's an actual experiment, run in real laboratories, that shows exactly how watching changes what gets to exist. Picture a wall with two narrow slits cut into it, side by side, and behind the wall, a screen that records every impact. Now picture something small enough to be strange, an electron fired one at a time alone toward that wall, with long pauses between each launch so there's no possibility of particles interacting with each other in flight. Common sense says each electron goes through one slit or the other, like a marble through a door. Common sense is wrong. When nobody records which slit each electron passes through, the pattern building up on the screen behind the wall is not two neat clusters lined up with the slits. It's a rippled pattern of bands, light, dark, the exact signature you'd expect from two overlapping waves interfering with each other. Each single electron, alone, with no partner particle anywhere nearby, behaves as if it passed through both slits at once and interfered with itself. This is the double-slit experiment, first performed with light in the early 1800s by Thomas Young, later repeated with individual particles through the 20th century, and it is one of the most replicated results in the history of physics. No serious physicist disputes the pattern. The disagreement, historically, has only ever been about what it means. Here's where it turns personal for anyone who has ever tried to will something into existence. The moment scientists place a detector at the slits, a device that simply records which path each electron took, nothing more invasive than that, the interference pattern collapses. It disappears. The electrons stop behaving like a spread of possibilities and start behaving like discrete little marbles, landing in two clean clusters, exactly where common sense expected them the whole time. Nothing touched the electron with force. No one pushed it, blocked it, redirected it, or exerted any kind of physical pressure on its path. The only thing that changed was that information about its path became available, that it was, in some physical sense, seen. And seeing collapsed the wave of possibilities into a single definite outcome. This is called the observer effect, and it's worth pausing on the word observer for a moment, because it's the single most misunderstood word in this entire field. Now, before this goes anywhere near the version of this story that gets sold in weekend seminars, what does this experiment actually prove, and what does it not prove? It proves that measurement, the physical interaction of gathering which path information, collapses a quantum system from superposition into one determinate state. That's it. That's the whole claim, and it's already strange enough to reorganize your sense of reality. What it does not prove is that your personal hopes, wishes, or vibes reach into subatomic particles and rearrange your bank account. Observer in this context does not mean a hopeful human mind gazing meaningfully at the universe. It means any physical interaction that records information, a detector, a stray photon, a grain of dust. No experiment has ever shown consciousness acting at a distance on macroscopic outcomes. Any teacher who tells you otherwise is selling you certainty physics has never offered. This video is not going to do that to you. So why bring it up at all if it doesn't causally explain your life? Because it is the cleanest proof that the universe, in its raw, uncollapsed form, is not fixed. It is a field of live possibility. And that changes the question you should be asking. Not, how do I force a specific timeline into existence, but what in my own life keeps functioning like that detector at the slits, quietly collapsing every open possibility back into the same familiar outcome before I even notice it happened? Physicists have a more precise word for what that detector-like collapsing process actually is at a fundamental level, and it matters because it reframes the whole conversation. It's called decoherence, the process by which a quantum system loses its delicate state of superposition through interaction with its surrounding environment. Every stray photon, every particle of air, every unavoidable contact with the wider world nudges a quantum system toward one outcome and erases the others. This isn't a fringe idea. Decoherence theory, developed extensively since the 1970s, is the standard explanation physicists use for why we don't see large objects, chairs, cats, people, sitting in visible superposition. Decoherence isn't a villain, it's closer to friction. It's what happens when something delicate meets a busy, noisy environment that won't stop touching it. Sit with that image for a second, because you already know this feeling. You have had a fragile, half-formed possibility for your life, a new direction, a different way of being, and you have watched it dissolve the moment it touched your usual environment, your usual doubts, your usual conversations, your usual 5 a.m. thoughts, not because reality forbade it, because it got touched by the same noisy field over and over until only the old familiar outcome survived. Consider two people who each spend a year wanting the same thing, to leave a job that has quietly been draining them. The first person holds the possibility privately, doesn't mention it at family dinners where the old safe script always wins, doesn't scroll job listings while sitting in the exact chair where they usually talk themselves out of things, doesn't run the decision past the one friend who always finds a reason to stay put. The second person does all three constantly, and wonders every few months why nothing ever changes. Neither is more or less deserving of the new life. But one of them kept the possibility in an environment quiet enough for it to survive, and the other kept re-exposing it to exactly the conditions that reliably decohere it back into the familiar outcome. Notice what that means for you, specifically, right now, listening to this. It's not that the second person lacked willpower. It's that willpower was never the variable that mattered. The environment was the variable. And you have been managing your environment, the people, the rituals, the 5 a.m. thoughts, without ever realizing that's what protecting a possibility actually requires. There's a reason this feels less like abstract physics and more like something you've lived. You already know intuitively that certain fragile things only survive in certain conditions. You wouldn't leave a seedling in direct wind and wonder why it never took root. You wouldn't expect a photograph to develop properly if you kept opening the darkroom door to check on it halfway through. Somewhere, you already understand that observation before something is ready changes what it becomes. You've just never applied that understanding to your own unfinished possibilities, the ones you keep exposing to the exact light that prevents them from developing at all. Not fragile. Unfinished. Here is the mini revelation this block has been building toward. Decoherence is not something that happens to particles in laboratories. It is something you can watch happen to your own possibilities in real time, every day. The physics gives you the mechanism's name. It does not yet tell you why your particular noisy environment, your nervous system, keeps producing the exact same interference pattern month after month, no matter how many times you clear the room. That part is not physics anymore. That part is you. This resolves the mystery of the vanishing interference pattern, but it opens a harder one. If decoherence explains why possibilities collapse when they're observed too soon, what explains why you keep observing yours too soon, on purpose against your own stated wishes, over and over, as if some part of you needed the old outcome to survive? Think about the specific thing you tried to manifest, not abstractly, the actual thing, the job, the relationship, the version of yourself that doesn't flinch when the phone rings. Now notice what your trying actually looked like, moment to moment, checking, rehearsing the worst version of the conversation, silently calculating the odds it would fail before it had even begun. Every one of those moments was not neutral. Each one was an act of measurement. You, functioning exactly like that detector at the slits, quietly gathering information that confirmed the old familiar outcome. You didn't collapse the new possibility because you failed at manifesting. You collapsed it because you kept observing for evidence of the outcome you already expected, and the environment, faithfully, kept nudging the system back toward whatever was most familiar to it. This reframes what effort actually was for you this whole time. You thought effort meant discipline, showing up, visualizing, repeating the affirmation, one more time. But look at what your nervous system was doing underneath that discipline. It was scanning, vigilant, checking the exits. That is not creative effort. That is threat monitoring, wearing the costume of self-improvement, not building, watching for danger. There's a version of this that shows up even in success, which is the part almost nobody talks about. Someone finally gets the promotion they visualized for a year, and within a week they're combing every meeting for signs it was a mistake, waiting for someone to notice they don't belong there. The manifestation worked, and the measuring didn't stop. It just found a new target. That's the tell that the real pattern was never about the specific outcome at all. It was about a nervous system that doesn't know how to stop scanning, regardless of what it's given. Here is a concrete case that makes this uncomfortably specific. Imagine someone who wants more than almost anything, a closer relationship with their adult child. They visualize the warm phone call every morning, and every time the phone actually rings, before a word is spoken, their chest tightens in anticipation of distance, of disappointment, of the same clipped tone as last time. That flinch is a measurement. It gathers which path information, and decoherence obediently delivers the familiar outcome again, not because the universe is cruel, but because the environment of that moment was saturated with the old expectation, and the old expectation is what got interacted with moment after moment, until it was the only thing left standing. Notice how this shows up in a completely different area of your own life, because it's rarely confined to just one. Maybe it's money. You say you want ease around it, but you check the account balance with your stomach already braced for a bad number, and the checking itself is a measurement that keeps the old scarcity pattern coherent. Maybe it's your own body. You say you want to trust it again, but you scan it every morning for the symptom that proved last time that it couldn't be trusted. In every version, the pattern is identical. The thing you're most anxious to change is the thing you're measuring most obsessively, and the measuring is precisely what keeps producing the result you're trying to escape. This is where the question sharpens into something almost unbearable. If the mechanism is this describable, if it really is just decoherence, just repeated measurement collapsing possibility into the familiar, why does knowing that not fix it? You can watch this video, understand every word of the double-slit experiment, and still walk away, pick up the phone, and flinch exactly the same way tomorrow morning. Insight into the mechanism does not disarm it. That gap between understanding and actually stopping is the real subject of this video, and it's bigger than physics. Here's why insight alone stalls out, and it's worth being precise about this instead of waving vaguely at old habits. Your conscious mind is not the part running the measurement. You can decide intellectually at 9 in the morning that you're going to stop checking, stop bracing, stop scanning for the familiar disappointment. And by the time the phone actually rings at 2 in the afternoon, the decision has evaporated, because the part of you that flinches was never listening to that morning decision in the first place. It operates faster than deliberation, underneath language, on its own separate track. Zoom out for a second. If the only obstacle were ignorance of the mechanism, this problem would already be solved. Understanding decoherence is not difficult, and yet almost no one who learns it changes their nervous system's behavior the next day. That's the mini payoff this block owes you, and it's an uncomfortable one. This resolves the mystery of why your visualizations don't work, but it creates a bigger problem, because now you know the block is you, and knowing that does not, by itself, remove your hand from the controls. But wait, if it's not ignorance, and it's not willpower, and it's not even sincerity, because you were sincere every single time you closed your eyes and tried, then what precisely is holding the controls? Because something is. Something with enough authority over your body to override a decision you made with your full conscious mind, hours earlier, in complete good faith. This is the point where most manifestation content quietly gives up and hands you another affirmation, because the honest next step requires leaving physics behind entirely and going somewhere most self-development content is too impatient to go, into the actual architecture of why a nervous system overrides its own conscious intentions and what it would take for it to stop. That architecture has been mapped in real clinical and neuroscientific detail by people who spent careers studying exactly this gap between what we intend and what we actually do. None of it requires you to believe anything mystical. It only requires you to look honestly at what's underneath the checking. So here is the real question, waiting at the edge of this block, the one that pulls you into the next. If your conscious mind already understands the mechanism and still can't stop repeating it, what is actually running the show? Because it isn't your intellect. Something older, faster, and far more protective is holding the controls, and it has excellent reasons for refusing to let go. There's a specific moment worth sitting inside before any theory gets named. You decide this time to actually let go, to stop checking, stop rehearsing, stop measuring the outcome in advance, and within seconds, something in you refuses. Not loudly, just a tightening, a pull back toward the familiar script, an almost audible internal voice saying some version of, "Not safe yet." That voice is not a flaw in your character. It's a part of you doing its job, a part that formed at some point to protect you from a specific kind of pain and has been running the same protective strategy ever since, regardless of whether the danger is still present. This idea comes from the work of psychotherapist Richard Schwartz, who developed a framework called Internal Family Systems, or IFS. Schwartz's model proposes that the mind is made up of distinct parts, and that the parts responsible for control, vigilance, and preemptive worry are not malfunctioning. They are protectors, doing exactly what protectors do, trying to prevent a wound from happening again by never letting go of the wheel. What IFS demonstrates in clinical practice across decades of use is that these protective parts respond to acknowledgement rather than force. Trying to suppress or override them tends to intensify their grip, while approaching them with curiosity tends to loosen it. What it does not demonstrate is that every internal resistance dissolves the moment you name it. Schwartz's own writing is explicit that this is ongoing internal relationship building, not a single insight that flips a switch. You right now have a protector like this. It's the part that turned visualizing your goal into checking obsessively for signs it's failing. It didn't sabotage you. It was trying to keep you safe from the specific, familiar shape of disappointment it already knows how to survive, because the unfamiliar shape of success is, to this part, an unknown threat it has no strategy for. Give that part a face for a moment, because it's easier to work with something specific than something abstract. Maybe it formed young, the version of you that learned early that hoping too visibly was dangerous, because visible hope was what got mocked or disappointed or used against you. That part didn't disappear when you grew up. It got promoted. It became the internal voice that turns every visualization into a rehearsal for loss. Because rehearsing loss, to this part, has always felt safer than being caught unprepared for it again. Not sabotage, vigilance. Why would safety and success ever feel like enemies to the same nervous system? Because your brain was never built to evaluate outcomes by whether they are good. It was built to evaluate them by whether they are predicted. This is the core claim of a body of work known as predictive processing, developed most influentially by neuroscientist Karl Friston and popularized for general audiences by Anil Seth. Their research describes the brain not as a passive camera recording the world, but as a prediction engine, constantly generating a model of what should happen next and treating any gap between prediction and reality, any surprise, as a kind of error to be minimized. Here's what that means for you, standing at the edge of the very change you say you want. A new, better outcome is, by definition, unpredicted. Your brain doesn't pass unpredicted the same way it passes good. It passes unpredicted as prediction error, and prediction error registers physiologically as something close to threat. This is what Friston and Seth's model demonstrates, that surprise itself carries a cost the brain is wired to minimize, independent of whether the surprise is pleasant. What it does not demonstrate is that this makes change impossible, only that the nervous system will resist the unfamiliar by default, and that resistance has to be worked with deliberately rather than wished away. Think about what this predicts, quite literally about the moment right after something good finally happens to you. Not the moment of struggle, the moment right after. The unfamiliar calm, the relationship that's actually going well. And notice, if you're honest, the strange discomfort that shows up right there in the good moment. the quiet urge to find something wrong with it, to brace for the other shoe. That discomfort isn't ingratitude. It's prediction error, dressed as suspicion. Your model of the world didn't include this outcome, and the gap between model and reality registers as static before it ever registers as relief. So the flinch when the phone rings, the tightening when you actually let go of the outcome, the reflexive search for what's wrong inside a moment that is, by every external measure, going right, none of that is weakness. It's a 400-million-year-old prediction system doing exactly what it evolved to do, applied to a situation it was never designed for, a version of your life it has no prior data on. You, holding this realization, are standing at the exact intersection where an old idea and a new one turn out to be the same idea. Roughly 2,000 years ago, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, once enslaved, then freed, then teaching in Rome, opened his surviving handbook with a distinction he considered the entire foundation of a workable life. Some things are within your control and some things are not, and confusing the two is the source of nearly all human suffering. What is within your control in his framework is never the outcome. It is only your own judgment, your own effort, your own attention. The outcome, who calls, what they say, whether the possibility collapses toward what you hoped, was never yours to grip in the first place. Notice that Epictetus wasn't writing self-help. He was writing survival philosophy for people with genuinely limited power over their circumstances, and he arrived, without any of the language of quantum mechanics or neuroscience, at the identical operational instruction this video has been building toward. Stop spending your attention on the part of the system that was never yours to move, and the part that is yours, your own noticing, your own withdrawal of the grip, becomes, almost embarrassingly, the only part that ever mattered. This is where Decoherence, IFS, and Epictetus point, from 3 different centuries and 3 different vocabularies, at the identical mechanism. The particle doesn't need your force. It needs the noisy, measuring environment to stop interfering with its superposition. Your protector doesn't need to be defeated. It needs to be shown patiently that the old danger has passed. Your predictive brain doesn't need certainty. It needs enough repeated, survived exposure to the unfamiliar that the unfamiliar stops registering as error. And Epictetus isn't offering resignation. He's offering the oldest known instructions for exactly this. Stop gripping what was never yours to grip, and the collapse you're afraid to allow finally has room to happen. Notice that none of these 3 frameworks asks you to fight yourself. That's the part almost every manifestation technique gets backward, arming you for a war against your own resistance. More discipline, more repetition, more force applied to a system that responds to force by tightening further. A protector defended against digs in. A prediction system flooded with demands for certainty produces more error signal, not less. What loosens a protective part, in Schwartz's own clinical language, isn't defeat. It's being asked directly and without hostility what it's afraid would happen if it stopped. Ask your own vigilance that question honestly, just once, and notice what answer arrives before your intellect has time to edit it. Not control. Contact. This is also why the promotion story from earlier makes sense now in a way it wouldn't have 3 blocks ago. The person scanning every meeting for proof they don't belong isn't reacting to the new job. They're reacting to how unfamiliar safety feels to a predictive system that has far more experience surviving threat than surviving ease. The work was never to earn the promotion twice. It was to give the nervous system enough repeated, uneventful exposure to the new reality that safety eventually gets recognized as safety, rather than filed as an anomaly waiting to be corrected. Here is the mechanism this whole video has been circling, named plainly. Manifestation, understood honestly, was never about generating force to push a new reality into being. It was about identifying every place your own vigilance is functioning as an unconscious measurement device, gathering evidence for the outcome you already expect, and gently, repeatedly, without violence, withdrawing that measurement. Not passivity, precision. The most demanding kind of restraint most people will ever practice, because every instinct in you has been trained to believe restraint is dangerous. That's the answer to the question this video opened with: Why the easiest thing in physics is the hardest thing you've ever tried to do. It was never a physics problem. It was always a nervous system problem, wearing physics as a metaphor, and metaphors don't get gentler just because you finally understand them. So let's stop talking about particles and protectors for a moment and talk about you. You are most likely someone who has already tried the effortful version. The affirmations said with gritted teeth. The vision board checked at midnight like it might have quietly updated itself. And you are most likely exhausted in a very specific way. Not the exhaustion of failure, but the exhaustion of gripping something for months or years that was never asking to be gripped in the first place. Maybe you are listening to this in a moment where you have already half decided that manifestation was a story sold to tired people, and some part of you clicked on this video hoping to be told, once and for all, that none of it was real. That part of you is not wrong to be skeptical. Skepticism here is not the enemy of this idea, it's the beginning of a more honest version of it. You are also, if you have made it this far, someone capable of an uncomfortable kind of honesty. The willingness to consider that the obstacle was never out there in some conspiracy of bad luck or an unresponsive universe, but in the very same vigilance you were taught your whole life to call responsibility. Maybe you were the kid who learned to read a room before anyone else in it did. Maybe you were the one who kept things from falling apart, who noticed the mood shift before it was spoken, who got very good, very early, at scanning for what was about to go wrong. If that's you, then everything this video has described isn't some abstract cognitive quirk. It's the specific hard-earned skill you built to survive something real, now running on autopilot in a life that no longer requires it, pointed uselessly at your own good fortune, treating it the way it once treated actual danger. Here's the thing, no one tells you at the start. This isn't a video about how to try harder at letting go. Trying harder at letting go is the same protector, wearing a new outfit, holding the same clipboard, running the same shift it's always run. You don't need a better technique. You needed someone to say plainly that the technique was never going to work, because the technique was built by the very part of you that benefits from nothing changing. Slow down here for a second, because this isn't a moment to rush past on the way to a tidy conclusion. If any of this has landed, the flinch, the checking, the exhaustion of gripping something that was never asking to be gripped, that recognition itself is already doing something. Not fixing, not yet. Just noticing honestly without the usual follow-up reflex to immediately fix what you've noticed. Let it sit there, unmanaged, for once. That alone, the willingness to not immediately convert insight into a new form of effort, is rarer than it sounds, and it's closer to the actual practice than anything a checklist could ever give you. Go back to the beginning of this video, the tightness in your chest, the sentence repeated with gritted teeth, the quiet sense that you were pushing a door that was already open. You can name now exactly what that pushing was. It was a nervous system, formed by real history, mistaking an unfamiliar future for a threat, and doing the only thing it knew how to do about a threat: measure it, monitor it, hold it in place. Not a lack of belief, not a lack of discipline. A protector, doing its job too well in a world that has already changed. The physics was never the hard part. Reality, at its most basic level, is already a field of open possibility, indifferent to how much force you apply to it. It was never waiting for your effort. It was waiting for your attention to stop interfering with what it was already trying to become. Remember the two people who both wanted to leave the same kind of job. The difference between them was never talent or luck, or some secret formula for believing harder. It was how much quiet, undisturbed room they gave the possibility to survive contact with reality. That's the entire instruction, stripped of any mysticism. Protect the possibility from your own vigilance the way you'd protect a photograph from light, and it develops on its own timeline, not yours. This also means the moment you've been waiting for, the sign, the breakthrough, the proof it's working, was never going to arrive as a feeling of effort finally paying off. It arrives, if it arrives at all, as an absence. The absence of the flinch when the phone rings, the absence of the midnight check. A quiet you didn't manufacture, because you finally stopped interfering with it long enough for it to be there. You don't need to trust the universe for this to work. You barely need to trust yourself. You only need to notice the next time your hand reaches for the phone to check, or your mind reaches for the rehearsal of disappointment, that the reaching itself is the whole mechanism, and that noticing it just once, without immediately trying to control the noticing too, is the entire practice this video has been describing the whole time. That's the whole reframe in one sentence you can carry out of this video. Stop measuring the outcome and start noticing where you're still measuring. Manifestation was never a technique, it was a relationship, with the part of you that's still afraid to find out what happens if it finally stops watching the door. Not force permission. If this video put language on something you have felt for years but never been able to name, that's not a coincidence you should let slide past you. That kind of clarity is rare, and it doesn't usually arrive twice by accident. Subscribing here isn't a favor to this channel. It's a decision about the kind of thinking you want more of in your life, the kind that keeps handing you back pieces of yourself you'd stopped expecting to find. Grab the companion ebook, The Quiet Force, linked in the description, next video. What happens after the grip finally loosens? What's the door you're still pushing?